Yamunatira Vanatari Jayarata Madhava Kunjavihari. No. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And we have some particular way that we do this. There's a lot of verses. Okay, we do the translations first. Okay, so who starts? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, Scheduled Incarnations. Today we're going from text 26 to 39. Text 26, translation. When the world is overburdened by the fighting strength of kings who have no faith in God, the Lord, just to diminish the distress of the world, descends with his plenary portion. The Lord comes in his original form with beautiful black hair, and just to expand his transcendental glories, he acts extraordinarily. No one can properly estimate how great he is.
There's no doubt about Lord Krishna's being the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, how was it possible for him to kill a giant demon like Putana when he was just on the lap of his mother? To overturn a cart's leg over the pencil, or to uproot a pair of legs so high that they touched the sky when he was falling. All these activities are impossible for anyone.
Then also, when the cowherd boys and their animals drank the poisoned water of the river Yamuna, and after the Lord in his childhood revived them by his merciful glance, just to purify the water of the river Yamuna, he jumped into it as if playing and chastised the venomous Kaliya snake, which was licking its tongue, emitting waves of poison. Who can perform such Herculean tasks about the Supreme Lord?
On the very night of the day, on the very night of the day of the chastisement of the Kaliya snake, when the inhabitants of Brajabhumi were sleeping carefreely, there was a forest fire ablaze due to dry leaves, and it appeared that all the inhabitants were sure to meet their death. But the Lord, along with Balaram, saved them simply by closing his eyes. Such are the superhuman activities of the Lord.
When the cowherd woman, Krishna's foster mother Yashoda, was trying to tie the hands of her son with ropes, she found the rope to always be insignificant in length. And when she finally gave up, Lord Krishna, by and by, opened his mouth, wherein the mother found all the universe is situated. Seeing this, she was doubtful in her mind, but she was convinced in a different manner of the mystic nature of her son.
Lord Krishna saved his foster father Nanda Maharaj from the fear of the demigod Varuna and released the cowherd boys from the caves of the mountain, for they were placed there by the son of Maya. Also, to the inhabitants of Vrindavan, who were busy working during daytime and sleeping soundly at night because of their hard labor in the day, Lord Krishna awarded promotion to the highest planet in the spiritual sky. All these acts are transcendental and certainly prove without any doubt his godhood.
When the cowherd men of Vrindavan, under instruction of Krishna, stopped offering sacrifices to the heavenly king Indra, the whole tract of land known as Vraj was threatened with being washed away by constant heavy rains for 7 days. Lord Krishna, out of his causeless mercy upon the inhabitants of Vraj, held up the hill known as Govardhan with one hand only. Although he was only 7 years old, he did this to protect the animals from the onslaught of water.
When the Lord was engaged in his pastimes of the rasa dance in the forest of Vrindavan, enlivening the sexual desires of the wives of the inhabitants of Vrindavan by sweet and melodious songs, the demon by the name of Sankachuda, a rich follower of the treasure of heaven, Kubera, kidnapped the damsels, and the Lord severed his head from his trunk.
All demonic personalities like Pramla, Dinkua, Baka, Kesha, Atrista, Chanrua, Ukista, Kuvala, Yapita, Elephant, Kamsa, Yavana, Narakashura, and Pandurka, great marshals like Salva, Divada, the Divadana monkey, and Balava, Davar, Danka, Bakara, the seven bulls, Sambar, Vindukartha, and Rukumi, as also great warriors like Kamboja, Mastya, Kura, Sinjarya, and Kaikaya would all fight vigorously, either with the Lord Hari directly or with under him his names of Baladev, Arjuna, Yuma, etc., and the demons. Thus being killed would attain either the impersonal Ramajoti or his personal abode in Vaikuntha planets.
The Lord himself, in his incarnation as the son of the Satyavati Vaisadeva, will consider his compilation of the Vedic literature to be very difficult for the less intelligent persons with short life, and thus he will divide the tree of Vedic knowledge into different branches according to the circumstances of the particular age.
When the atheists, after being well versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets, prepared by the great scientist Maya, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles.
Thereafter, at the end of Kali Yuga, when there exist no topics on the subject of God, even at the residence of so-called saints and respectable gentlemen of the three higher castes, when the power of government is transferred to the hands of ministers elected from the low-born Shudra class or those less than them, and when nothing is known of the techniques of sacrifice, even by word, at that time the Lord will appear as the supreme chastiser.
At the beginning of creation, there are penance, myself, Brahma, and the Prajapatis, the great sages who generate. Then, during the maintenance of the creation, there are Lord Vishnu, the demigods with controlling powers, and the kings of different planets. But at the end, there is irreligion, and then Lord Shiva and the atheists, full of anger, etc. All of them are different representative manifestations of the energy of the supreme power, the Lord.
Okay. So what do we do with this Sanskrit? Kokena jiva haranam yadulukikaya. Trimasikasya chapada shakato pavritaha. Yad ringatana karat kalena divi sprishurva. Umulanam tvalitaratar junayar nabhavyam. You do it 3 times. Okay. Okay, the word for word together. Okay. Killing the three months old. Taken. Okay, now person. Translation. There is no doubt about Lord Krishna's being the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, how was it possible for him to kill a giant demon like Putana when he was just on the lap of his mother, to overturn a cart with his leg when he was only 3 months old, to uproot a pair of Arjuna trees so high that they touched the sky when he was only crawling? All these activities are impossible for anyone other than the Lord himself. Purport. I read it. One cannot manufacture a god by one's mental speculation or by numerical votes, as has become a practice for the less intelligent class of men. God is God eternally, and an ordinary living entity is eternally a part and parcel of God. God is one God the same. And ordinary living entities are many without number. All such living entities are manifested, are maintained by God himself, and that is the verdict of the Vedic literature. When Krishna was on the lap of his mother, and the demon Putana appeared before his mother and prayed to the child in her lap, Mother Yashoda agreed, and the child was transferred onto the lap of Putana, who was in the garb of a respectable lady. Putana wanted to kill the child by smearing poison on the nipple of her breast, but when everything was complete, the Lord sucked her breast along with her very air of life. The demon's gigantic body, and the demon's gigantic body, said to be as long as 6 miles, fell down. But Lord Krishna did not need to expand himself to the length of the she-demon Putana, although he was quite competent to extend himself more than 6 miles long. In his Vamana incarnation, he posed himself as a dwarf Brahmin, but when he took possession of his land promised by Bali Maharaj, he expanded his footstep to the top of the universe, extending over thousands and millions of miles. So it was not very difficult for Krishna to perform a miracle by extending his bodily feature. But he had no desire to do it because of his deep filial love for his mother Yashoda. If Yashoda had seen Krishna in her lap, extending 6 miles to cope with the she-demon Putana, then the natural filial love of Yashoda would have been hurt, because in that way Yashoda would have to come to know that her so-called son, Krishna, was God himself. And with the knowledge of the godhood of Krishna, Yashoda Mai would have lost the temper of her love for Krishna as a natural mother. But as far as Lord Krishna is concerned, he is God always, either as a child on the lap of his mother or as the coverer of the universe, Brahmadev. He does not require to become God by undergoing severe penances, although some men think of becoming God in that way. By undergoing severe austerities and penances, one cannot become one or equal with God, but one can attain most of the godly qualities. A living being can attain godly qualities to a large extent, but he cannot become God, whereas Krishna, without undergoing any type of penance, is God always, either in the lap of his mother or growing up or at any stage of growth. So at the age of only 3 months, he killed the Shakatasura, who had remained hidden behind a cart in the house of Yashoda Mai. And when he was crawling and was disturbing his mother from doing household affairs, the mother tied him with a grinding pestle, but the naughty child dragged the pestle up to a pair of very high Arjuna trees in the yard of Yashoda Mai. And when the pestle was stuck between the pair of trees, they fell down with a horrible sound. When Yashoda Mai came to see the happenings, she thought that her child had been saved from the falling trees by the mercy of the Lord, without knowing that the Lord himself, crawling in her yard, had wreaked the havoc. So that is the way of reciprocation of loving affairs between the Lord and his devotees. Yashoda Mai wanted to have the Lord as her child, and the Lord played exactly like a child in her lap, but at the same time played the part of the Almighty Lord whenever it was so required. The beauty of such pastimes was that the Lord fulfilled everyone's desire. In the case of felling the gigantic Arjuna trees, the Lord's mission was to deliver the 2 sons of Kuvera who were condemned to become trees by the curse of Narada, as well as to play like a crawling child in the yard of Yashoda, who, with transcendental pleasure in seeing such activities of the Lord in the very yard of her house. Om Vijnana Chamarandasya Gyananshana Shalakaya Chakshur Omilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, in his preface to Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada writes that one should go through the first 9 cantos of the Bhagavatam in order to prepare oneself for the 10th canto, where the pastimes of Krishna are explained. But here we see that even in Canto 2, we're getting previews of coming attractions. These, practically speaking, we're almost getting a summary of the whole 10th canto in these verses here, which are part of this chapter called Scheduled Incarnations. So just like there's a schedule for the bus, or there's a schedule for airplanes, there's a schedule for the appearances of the different incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in his original form, the schedule is that Krishna appears once in a day of Brahma or Kalpa. So a day of Brahma lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. It's followed by a night of Brahma, which also lasts 4,320,000,000 years. So the days of Brahma are part of a larger cycle of time. They're the Manvantara periods, which take up 72 cycles of the 4 yugas, the Cheta yugas. And then there are the Manvantara periods, and it's a vast period of time. So we're actually quite fortunate that Krishna appeared less than, just about 5,000 years ago on this planet. And he won't be coming until the next day of Brahma in his original form. So we're very fortunate there. Now, in today's verse, it mentions several of Krishna's pastimes, like a great deal of the purport is dedicated to the story of how Krishna was tied by Mother Yashoda to a grinding mortar pestle, and he pulled the mortar through the opening between the 2 Arjuna trees, and the mortar got stuck, and he pulled the trees down with a big crash, and then these 2 shining figures came out of the trees, Nalakavara and Manigriva, who were associates of Kuvera. So there were some children around who observed what had happened. And when the older residents of Vrindavan came to see what had happened, because it was a big crash, something had obviously happened, something catastrophic, and they arrived on the scene, and they asked the children what had happened, and they said Krishna was going between the 2 trees, dragging this mortar, and Krishna pulled down the trees, and the 2 shining figures came out, and the cowherd men didn't believe him. They started speculating about what must have happened, but they didn't accept the testimony of the children at first. So in our Vedic system of knowledge, there are three kinds of evidence. There's pratyaksha, which means direct sense evidence. And the children had pratyaksha. They had actually seen what Krishna had done. And sometimes it's said about pratyaksha that it's imperfect because we have imperfect senses. Our senses are limited. We make mistakes. We become illusion. We cheat or become the victim of cheating. So, therefore, we consider pratyaksha in the material sense to be an imperfect way or incomplete way of getting knowledge about things. So then there's anumana, which means logical inference. That means thinking about what we observe and trying to make some logical conclusion. Because I saw or heard this or that must have happened. The logic is also imperfect. So the third pramana, the Shabda pramana, the transcendental sound emanating from the perfect source, Krishna ultimately, is the superior form of knowledge or evidence. But the there is the spiritual kind of pratyaksha, which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, pratyaksha vinamdharanyam susukartamapyayam. By the process of devotional service, we can get direct experience of especially transcendental subject matters, but Shabda can be a guide even in matters related to this material world. So, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that when Krishna was taken by the she-demon, Putana, she expanded herself into a form 6 miles long. And Prabhupada explains that Krishna could have done that, but he would have disturbed the relationship that Mother Yashoda had with him. Namely, she wanted the best, most perfect child, so Krishna agreed to play that role. And if he had taken that form, a big form, to battle with Putana on the same level, then she would have been disturbed. Like once Krishna was playing with his friends, and Mother Yashoda was told he had eaten dirt. So she took him and asked him to open his mouth because he was saying, "No, I didn't eat any dirt." So she wanted to see, and she looked into his mouth, and he expanded his universal form, and it disturbed her normal relationship with Krishna. She began to appreciate, oh, I've been thinking this little boy is my son. He's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But then Krishna immediately covered her. So Krishna can appear for his devotees like an ordinary child or a spouse or a lover or a friend. When Lord Brahma stole all of the Krishna's cowherd boy friends and the calves out in the forest, Krishna duplicated. He expanded himself and duplicated all of the boys and calves. And for a whole year, the parents of these other cowherd boys saw Krishna playing the role of their son perfectly. They couldn't distinguish Krishna's duplication of their sons from their real sons. And they carried on like that for a whole year until Lord Balaram kind of detected something. So that, in one sense, is it's almost, for me, frightening in a sense that Krishna could take the form of anyone, that you think is your child or your friend or husband or wife or lover. So as I said, we're getting a preview of coming attractions here in these verses from this chapter on scheduled incarnations. It's always an honor for me to come to Gainesville, to Krishna House. Actually, in the 1970s, I was at the Gainesville Temple on Depot, and I was part of the original Krishna lunch program. We would go 3 or 4 devotees in a van to the university every day, and we would bring chapati, sabji, rice, dal, halva, and spread a madras on the ground and distribute prasadam to 20 or 25 people, students. And I made the chapatis. They always went. So it's pretty amazing to see how that developed. So I'll stop here Is there any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Bro. If I may take advantage of the memory you just shared, being there early on in Gainesville, how many chapatis you used to make? Every day or twice a week? How many days?
We would go out, I think, 5 days. You know, it was a regular program. It wasn't at all authorized by the university, but nobody stopped it, at least during the time I was there. And it was a very attractive program. You know, I liked participating very much. Yes?
So, were you here when Prabhupada visited Gainesville?
No, I wasn't. That was before my time. When I was in Gainesville, it was 1975. I think Prabhupada came a few years earlier than that. Yes?
I had a question about like when we were discussing Krishna duplicating himself as the cowherd boys. And so, like you said, it's kind of, I don't know, it's a weird thought. I didn't think about it so deeply before. So I feel like it would make sense if Krishna were to like duplicate himself as like me in this conditioned form, but the cowherd boys are like, you know, pure devotees. So I don't know, can you speak about like that a little bit? Like, was their will dormant and he just acted as they would? Like, what to speak of their individuality? And I don't know.
Samagam Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. Krishna says that we're part and parcel of him. So in one sense, we're a tiny sample of Krishna. Just like a spark is the same substance as the fire, but the spark is not the fire. So we are eternal. Krishna says we're his eternal parts and parcels, Sanatana, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. So we have an eternal connection with Krishna. And you know, it's also stated, Nitya Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitanam Eko Bahunam Yovididati Kama. We're eternal, we're conscious, we're individual, we're persons. Krishna is also eternal, it's a person, an individual, but the difference is that he maintains all the other eternal, individual, conscious persons. And in devotional service, we have to come to understand how Krishna is reciprocating with us. Because if the goal is eventually to enter and uncover what one's Swarupa is, one's original spiritual form, in which one has an eternal loving relationship with Krishna in one of the rasas. That means we're going to have to come to understanding how Krishna is reciprocating with us. And I said it was frightening in one sense that Krishna can take any form. He can. I mean, Mother Yashoda is just thinking, "This is my child." So, Jambavan, who was involved in Ramalila, he was fighting Krishna. He had the Shamataka jewel, which Krishna wanted to find. So Krishna went into the forest. He found the cave where Jambavan was living. And Jambavan had given the Shamataka jewel to his child. And when Krishna came into the cave, he didn't know who he was. He thought there's just some stranger entering my space here. So he began to wrestle with Krishna. Of course, that was a service to Krishna, because sometimes Krishna likes to fight with someone. But in the course of that service, in the course of wrestling, he realized it's my Lord, Ram. Of course, Ram is another form of Krishna. It's one of his expansions. But for me, the interesting point there is that by engaging in service, you can come to sense how Krishna is reciprocating with you. If something very wonderful happens, then you can understand Krishna is reciprocating with my service. Or we can appreciate how Krishna is reciprocating with others as well. When another person is able to render some wonderful service, we can appreciate when Krishna is being very merciful to that person. So ultimately, we have to come to understand that as a step towards discovering what kind of service Krishna wants to reciprocate with us eternally as part of his Nitya Leela. And part of our training for that comes from Srimad Bhagavatam, where we're seeing how Krishna is reciprocating with his different devotees. And by constantly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, which is all about Krishna, Krishna's activities in the spiritual world, Krishna's activities in the material world, gradually our own eternal relationship with Krishna will become apparent to us. But what's interesting is normally we're thinking of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the information we're being given here is telling us that at a certain stage, that appreciation of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead is replaced by the sense that in Mother Yashoda's case, this most wonderful child who just absorbs my whole consciousness. Everything I do is related to that wonderful child. So, in the spiritual world, there are places, the Vaikuntha planets, which are for those whose relationship with Krishna is based on understanding him as the Supreme Lord, the most powerful absolute controller. That mood of awe and reverence is dominant in the Vaikuntha planets. But in the Loka Vrindavan, the mood is different, spontaneous attraction. So the first thing we have to learn is that Jivara Swarupahoy Krishna Nityadas, Lord Chaitanya said, were servants of Krishna. So that's the first stage. And then exactly what kind of servant of Krishna we are will gradually become revealed. Okay. I went a little bit over time. Okay, thank you, Hare Krishna.